Thanks for inviting me to speak. And I'm Aline Baeck. I have been in London for about 5 years. I'm currently running the design team at Capital One here in the UK. I come from a long line of working in-house, both here and in Silicon Valley, which is where I'm from. And it's really those experiences that I'm going to draw on to talk to you today about design thinking and really the relationship of design thinking to designers, particularly designers in-house. So one of the things I would pose to you is there's a lot of talk about design thinking, obviously, in the industry and in business. But can we as designers kind of take it back, make it our own? Should it really be our best friend, which I believe it is? And we can leverage kind of all the energy around design thinking to help us do more strategic work. I'm going to talk through some examples of that from my own career. So I'm sure you all know design thinking is really big business. You hear about it everywhere. The Harvard Business Review regularly publishes articles on it. There is an enormous amount of books written about it. These were just like the first 2 pages in Amazon. It's just amazing how much is out there on design thinking. And indeed, a lot of companies really have built their consultancies on design thinking also. IDEO being one of the foremost of the ones I had the earliest experience with when I was in California. And these consultancies and these books tend to promote a process of design thinking. This is one from the Stanford D School, the design school at Stanford that has influenced a lot of Silicon Valley companies. And you can see kind of the core tenets of design thinking here. And I know many of you know a lot about design thinking, so I'm not going to belabor the definition of it. But here, really, I think the core tenets are customer empathy, deeply understanding your potential customers or people. There is this idea of kind of understanding the problem or the insights coming out of that understanding of customers, which here is labeled define. There's this idea of going broad or flaring to ideate through many different ideas. And another core tenet is just early prototyping, early testing, getting lots of feedback, trying out things. If you look at IDEO's process that they've put together for educators, you can see here a similar set of basic building blocks for the process. And discovery being around, learning about customers, interpretation, really sinking into that and understanding the problem, the ideation, experimentation, evolution, that iterative process. For anyone who's a designer in this room, which I assume a lot of you are, you will totally recognize this process. This is the native process that designers follow that's kind of been, I think, packaged up in a way to make it more accessible to non-designers. So design thinking, as I said, is big business, but how can we retrieve it for ourselves? How can we use it to do more strategic work? And the reason I think this is important is I hear this a lot from designers. How can I get out of doing wireframes into doing more strategic work? How can I help the business understand what problems it needs to solve and propose new ideas? How can I get a seat at the table? There's been many conference papers around these kind of topics. And I do think design thinking is one of those areas that we can leverage to do that. And so I think about the dog, how do we get that leash back on the dog and help it to our own purposes and bring it back into our own practice and use it for doing more strategic work. So I'm going to go through some case studies. I've got 3 companies that I've worked for, 3 different case studies. They show a kind of broad range of different types of work. And I hope by talking through this, you'll get some ideas of how to use it yourselves. The first one is at eBay, and this is a strategic project that I did in conjunction with my research partner, Andrew Harder. I want to give him credit because he did a lot of the work. And this was a project that we actually started together. And that was out of frustration at being located in Europe. We're both here. I was running design in the European office, and he was running research. And eBay is primarily an American company, which I'm sure you know, which means that we were outside many of the strategic talks that happened, outside a lot of the business strategy that happened. Just because of the 8-hour time difference, we're not in the building to be at those meetings all the time. And so what we wanted to do was really to use my design skills, his research skills, to make a more strategic impact in eBay. And we decided to do that by basically forming our own project and doing it with the European leaders of eBay, who also struggle to get a voice in an American company. This is deliberately blurred out a bit, but basically what we did was propose a basic innovation model with our strategic partners, very similar really to a lot of the design thinking process. But really, I think one of the key parts of this project that set it apart was that we spent a lot of time sinking into our strategic leadership in eBay to understand the problems they were trying to solve. We ran around and talked to many of them to understand what their priorities were, because we thought it was important that we didn't just go into a project from a design point of view and produce something that we thought was cool or neat or even just had customer value. But it was important that it aligned to a business strategy, to a strategic intent that the company already had, so that the work that we did would actually see the light of day. I think that is one of the challenges with a lot of design thinking projects, that they kind of reach this cliff after that project, or after that process that I showed, where a lot of experimentation is done. But then what happens to those concepts? A lot of times they don't go much further. So I think the lesson I would bring out here is sinking into that strategic intent, and understanding that enabled us to direct the whole subject of the project into something we knew the company would care about and that they would take up. So what we did in this particular project was once we had kind of narrowed down on the subject which we were going after and looking at consumer-to-consumer sellers within eBay, what we did was really go out and understand those customers, do a lot of empathy interviews. We went to 3 different countries, followed them around, really tried to understand why they were selling. We talked to many people who sold on eBay. We also talked to many people who were selling other places in boot sales. In Germany, they have a lot of marketplaces there, physical marketplaces. So we're really trying to understand these people who have selling as part of what they do as a living or as a passion, apart from their potential involvement in eBay. By doing that, we really were able to form a set of workshops that we did and documented to help people understand what we learned from these folks that we visited. I think one of the most useful things that we produced was really a system of the user information that then could be leveraged by different groups at eBay. So one of the outputs of this was not just product ideas, but the output was a package that helped other groups use this information for their own product ideas. So we did a lot of capturing of the user insights into frameworks, and formed a whole booklet of how to run a workshop on those customer insights and videos, so people could watch kind of raw customer data, create their own insights in the business given what they cared about, and then use these workshop materials themselves, sometimes with our help, sometimes with someone else's help, to run their own ideation sessions, create their own ideas. And so this meant that this one project, which typically would have been done for a particular purpose and maybe gotten a few ideas out of it, just had a much bigger influence in European eBay because so many people were able to use it, because we took the time to create that bedrock of information that people could then draw on. we viewed this as a design challenge to actually design how people would experience this information and create their own ideas from it. And spent a lot of time actually designing the workshop materials that people could then use so that people wanted to use it because it was well structured and aesthetically pleasing. We also developed a lot of frameworks specifically for this project. You probably will have seen some different versions of something like this, helping people who don't usually define problems with a structure that helps them kind of define them in a way that helps them to think through all the pieces that problem needs to be comprised of so that they can then make those insights. So we developed a lot of these different kind of frameworks so that when people went through the workshop, they had all the templates that they needed to actually create the information that would then go into the ideation sessions. I mean, one of the things we found, which I'm sure those of you who have been in these kind of sessions recognize, is that a really crisp problem definition makes ideation just so much more successful, so we thought that was worth spending time on. So we've really created our own little design thinking process for this project within eBay to help people leverage the information that we created. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm... So that was eBay. That's an example, I think, of where we've taken a strategic project, a specific project, and really broadened it out and made its influence a lot wider by using those design thinking techniques ourselves and creating some frameworks for people to use and take them forward. The next one I'm going to talk about is at Intuit. So Intuit is a U.S. company that is in the financial software sector. So it creates small business financial software for small businesses to run their business. It creates personal financial software. It creates U.S. Personal tax software. And it's a company that's been around, I think, probably 25 years now, maybe longer, and was built really on these major markets of this financial software for small business and for personal use. But what happened at Intuit is that there was a recognition that it was quite a mature company, that innovation had really slowed down. There wasn't much of a product pipeline. And there was a need to really kind of regenerate internally how ideas got developed and how they got pulled through into experimentation to see what new products could be done. There was a feeling like there was a lot of good ideas at the company that were getting killed quite quickly in the process. And so one of the, I think, interesting things about Intuit is it had a founder CEO, Scott Cook, who really had customer focus at the core of what he did. He was an engineer who started the company, recognized that his wife had a difficulty using her checkbook, and started following people around, understood how they used checkbooks, and developed the first kind of digital checkbook, which became into the personal finance software. So the good thing about that is this was a company that had really customer empathy and understanding at its core. It was really important to everyone in the company, and so that was a trait that we were able to build on when we faced this challenge. So this challenge was to both recognize that we had an innovation product pipeline challenge, but also to think about what we wanted to be as a company. We had long had a customer focus, but not much of a design focus. And so there was a new mission crafted here, and it was around this project that I'm going to talk about, which is called Design for Delight. So part of the mission here was really about trying to recognize and trying to characterize the expectations of our software, kind of new expectations within the company, that just good enough wasn't enough anymore to release something. We really wanted to go beyond customer expectations. We wanted to evoke positive emotion, and we needed to measure those things in a way that kept us honest internally. And it was out of this Design for Delight initiative that I was part of that really fostered this reinvention of the innovation pipeline. And so the way that happened was Scott Cook, our CEO, recognized this problem, and he had heard a lot about design thinking and thought that this was a way forward. So he picked 12 designers from the company. The company had about 8,000 people then. And I was one of those designers to really work on this as a side project to figure out what was going on to the product pipeline, why were ideas not getting forward, how could kind of design and design thinking help the company forward to improve this. So this is a graphic from the Stanford D School. As I mentioned earlier, the D School is really instrumental in a lot of Silicon Valley companies, which it was at Intuit also, which is in Silicon Valley. Because the D School is quite good, I think, at characterizing and educating people about design thinking, about the methods there, and they have a lot of influence on a lot of the CEOs in Silicon Valley who go through some of their business incubator classes. And so we leverage them also as part of our Design for Delight initiative to really use their materials and their thinking, what they had learned going through all these companies, with that design thinking process I showed you at the beginning, and how we could bring some of that into Intuit from an internal design perspective. So we didn't want to hire an outside consultancy. We wanted to home grow this ability inside Intuit. We thought that was a better way to make it stick. So through these 12 people, we really did a lot of kind of experimentation on what we thought would work in our own areas. I was running design for the small business web product at the time. And so we eventually articulated the 3 tenets that we thought were critical for Design for Delight, which you will see echoed in the processes I showed you from the D School and for IDEO. These are all quite similar themes that you find in design thinking initiatives. So this deep customer empathy, as I mentioned, Intuit was built on that. So that was really important to maintain and enhance that capability. The other one is just to go broad, to go narrow. So we found that as we did some analysis to some of the projects that have been killed along the way, we found that a lot of times people just go to the solution too fast. They're too quick to criticize and to kind of kill good ideas with why it can't be done. So this idea of trying to institutionalize this idea of going broad before you narrow down, making sure you're thinking about the whole range of possibilities before you decide that it can't be built, that became really critical for us to do in a habitual way to keep those more, I think, strategic and more far-fetched ideas alive longer so they could get some purchase within the company. The third thing is rapid experimentation with customers. So this idea of not, obviously this is a tenet of lean UX and a lot of other things now, but this was at a time where it was newer, and that rapid experimentation is really important to get out and try out ideas. It meant those ideas could be less well thought out, because if you're going to get to a customer faster, it means you're not investing that much in it. So we are more willing to be risky with our ideas, and that fostered a culture of being able to put out more interesting ideas and let ideas live longer throughout the process to see if they would fly with customers. So as part of these 12, these innovation catalysts is what we were called, we felt like by bringing those 12 designers and seeding them in the business, so it was deliberate that we didn't we had a centralized design group. They weren't 12 people in that centralized design group trying to push these ideas out. They were 12 people who were all out in the different lines of business who were doing it from the ground up and really fostering that thinking within their own businesses. And that was really a network effect that led us to be able to take some initial small amount of catalysts and doing design sessions around our own products to, in a couple of years, having trained 10 times as many catalysts all throughout the business, who really multiplied the amount of design happening. And so this story isn't so much about the Design for Delight initiative to me. It's really much more about the power of taking people who know some of the design thinking tenets because they're designers, and how you can seed that out in a way that really feels organic and affects the way the business operates. And that makes it stick longer. So Intuit is still going on. This is still a very strong program, and the program's been going probably for 6 or 7 years now. And it really has revolutionized Intuit as far as the way it puts out product, the way it thinks about innovation, and the way it fosters, I think, ideas much longer and is willing to incubate them without needing direct revenue or things like that. Really, that started with this program. Another drink. So I'm currently at Capital One. Capital One's a very interesting culture, also a very interesting company to be at right now because they're in the midst of a major business transformation. They are going from a company, and they're quite a large company in the US. They have banks, they have financial services, they have credit cards. Here in the UK, they're just a credit card company. But the whole business is undergoing a transformation where they call it a digital transformation, where they have in the past, all of their digital properties have been designed and hosted and built by third parties. It's really a financial company that has a digital capability, and they are deliberately transforming themselves into a digital company in the financial sector. It means they're bringing everything in-house. I'm the first head of design. There's a new 200-person engineering team coming in-house that's being hired. We're in the midst of hiring. And so it's just a huge culture shift, which comes with a lot of opportunity, I think, too, for design to have a big impact. So I was quite lucky coming into Capital One when I did about 6 months ago. If you know anything about Capital One, you will have heard that they bought Adaptive Path, which is a major design agency in the US 2 years ago. And so as part of this digital transformation, Capital One really recognized that design could be a really important part of that transformation, could give them a capability that other companies might not have, could give them a competitive advantage. And there were some designers in-house in the US that really showed the business what that kind of design thinking could do. Again, some of them trained at the Stanford D School, which came in and really showed the value of some more strategic design rather than designers just delivering product. And so as part of that recognition, that's why Capital One bought Adaptive Path, bringing that whole design thinking capability in-house, intact. It's like an internal agency within the US design team. It gives us this really a superpower for leveraging that expertise in design thinking and organization, how to do design thinking within different organizations at Capital One. And so as Adaptive Path came over here to the UK business last year, did a couple of strategic projects, and really inspired the UK business to create its own design department, hire me as head of design, and made really the case for design being an equal partner with the business, product management, and with technology, which has made a big difference in the company. And it's just such a fertile field for us in design, because I have found in other companies I've worked at that design is usually well understood with how it plays with product and how it delivers product, creating the designs that are needed to ship to customers. But strategic work in design, like I showed in Intuit and at eBay, is a harder sell. It takes a lot more convincing. You have to be in the right place at the right time. You have to have the right strategic partners. But because I think of Adaptive Path, the strategic nature of design is well recognized at Capital One a lot earlier than at other companies. And so as part of Capital One's mission, which is help customers succeed, we have been doing a lot of empathy research. We've just gone out and visited over 20 customers with kind of deep ethnography, corporate ethnography interviews to really understand how people feel about lending, how they feel about money, how they feel about being in debt. The idea being is that this is a new capability that we can bring at Capital One from a design perspective, that we can help them identify new products that come out of really deeply understanding customers, which is one of the core tenets of design thinking. And so this is another, I think, example of where designers have kind of taken that design thinking power back in-house and used it to have more strategic effect within the business. So we're just at the beginnings of this because our design team is pretty new, so I'm not going to say much more about it. So one of the interesting things I think about the processes I showed you earlier is those processes are really developed to be able to communicate core design practices to a non-design audience. Design thinking, a lot of design thinking is about helping non-designers think in ways that designers think and use methods designers use. But we as designers have more freedom. And I thought there was a really interesting article in the last couple weeks published by Carissa, who's from the D School, on taking design thinking back by designers. And that's what I want to encourage all of you to do, is use this kind of zeitgeist of design thinking out in the world for our own purposes to get into more strategic work. And I think one of the things that Carissa pointed out, which I thought was really smart, designers have the luxury of not needing a cookbook like those processes at the beginning. We don't need to follow that firm method of design thinking because these are practices we understand and we understand when to use them. So she encouraged in her article to really think about design thinking for designers as core abilities or core characteristics. I'm just going to put them up here. She deliberately did not order them because they're not meant to be a process. These are things that designers have a lot of experience with, and if they can use these in their work, they will help companies be more strategic, not have to follow that cookbook, but to really be in a position to do that in a more flexible and organic way. So just I'll call out a couple of them. Navigate ambiguity, so that ability to really sink into ambiguous spaces and find your way through it and help clarify it for your company and for the people that you work with. Designing your design work, so that's something that we did at eBay, where we recognized that this thing we were putting out actually needs to be designed itself, not just an output of design. And I would encourage you to, it's on Medium, the article, so I'd encourage you to look at that a little more if you're interested in following up. It's a great article. And so I would just leave you with this. The most common way that people don't have power to do something like design strategies, you give up that power. I have certainly found in my career just looking for those opportunities, partnering with the right people, using the methods that are native to designers, we have the power to do that kind of work if we want. We just need to look for the opportunities. So you can leash that dog, and you can really use it for your own purposes. That's it.
We're on tight schedule, but we definitely have time for the question.
Hiya, really interesting, thank you. So your catalyst slide, you talked about how kind of an organic process where design thinking was being embedded in the organization almost naturally after you seeded maybe your 10 catalysts.
Yep.
What's also implied in there is quite a big investment from the company in not minding spending time. I can't remember the phrase you used, but you said it was something like allowing the design thinkers to be freed from necessarily chasing directly corporate goals and follow the ideas according to customer need. Did that require quite an investment from the company and a big belief to kind of go, okay, we don't mind thinking about stuff that won't necessarily come to anything?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it required a big money investment. It was quite cheap because we were all doing our full-time jobs anyway. So from that perspective, but I think it did require a big commitment from management that this was important. And I think that is one of the things that made that program work so well, is that it was both bottoms up and tops down. And I do think without that management support, it would have been very difficult to have the effect that we wanted to have. Now, I will say that the head of the Central Design Group at Intuit had a big influence on that program, and she was able, I think, to get that management support, Karin Hansen, who's now, I think, at Facebook. But I do think having that investment on both ends really accelerated and gave us the support we needed. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Fantastic.